Welcome to the Astrophysics Podcast. If you've listened to the first 2 episodes and kept with it, first of all, thank you for listening. Secondly, I should let you know that this episode will be a little bit different from the last 2. A few weeks ago, I was in Santa Barbara at a conference celebrating the 60th birthday of Dr. Lars Bildston, who has made major contributions to the astrophysics community over his career, and I expect he'll continue to do so for a long time. I did not interview Lars, and in fact, I didn't even bother to ask him if he had any spare time during this conference to sit down with me because I knew the answer would be no, but perhaps I'll get him next time I'm there. However, one of the other attendees at this conference who I did get to interview was Dr. Francis Timmies, who is a professor of Earth and Space Exploration at Arizona State University, as well as Associate Editor-in-Chief of some of the most highly regarded scientific journals in astrophysics. Frank is an interesting guy. He's not like a lot of the other scientists I know. Most of us try to make our mark by working on the hot topics in astrophysics, and will usually summarize our work in terms of the biggest scientific questions. Frank is a little bit different. He has this incredible ability to see great power and potential in things that other people find mundane, and he has often made his mark by his service to the community, both as a journal editor and by producing a large number of public tools that other astrophysicists use to attack the big questions. So a lot of his work is sort of under the hood or behind the scenes, but as a result, he has managed to make major impact on a wide variety of topics in astrophysics. Talking with Frank, you can really tell he gets excited by the day-to-day process of reading papers, doing extremely detailed calculations, and writing code. And I have to say, his attitude is really contagious. So I hope you'll enjoy my conversation with him as much as I did. I'm Paul Duffel, and this is the Astrophysics Podcast. Notice me interrupting you a lot. It might seem like I'm being rude or pushy, but it's just so that it sounds like a dialogue rather than a monologue.
Believe me, you will. I will not be monologuing.
Okay, good.
Not my style.
Good to hear. All right.
Tend to be brief more than long.
Great. All right, I guess we're ready to get started now.
Sure.
So, welcome to the Astrophysics Podcast. I'm Paul Duffel, and my guest today is Dr. Francis Timmies. I don't think I've ever said your name as Francis while I've been in the same room with you, but Dr. Frank Timmies, professor of Earth and Space Exploration at Arizona State University. Dr. Timmies, thank you for being on the program.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for the invitation and invite to chat.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'd like to start things off by talking about you personally and how you got to be a scientist. So let's start by telling me a little bit about where you grew up.
Everywhere and nowhere, Paul.
Okay. Where were you born?
So I was born in San Jose, California, so okay. I'm a hoser. But my mom was 8 months pregnant and flew into San Jose because she specifically wanted me born in San Jose.
Really?
And then after I was born, 1-2 months after that, we flew out. And so
why did she specifically want you born in San Jose?
Because on my mom's side, the Danish ancestors came over to California in about the 1830s or something like that.
Okay.
They didn't get the gold land. But it was important for her that I be a 4th, 5th, 6th generation Californian. And so that's why I was born in San Jose.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. So that's a long legacy of family.
Yeah. And so they have these old, I guess, silver graphs or something like that. And they can point out my Danish ancestors on my mother's side from way back. Okay. But to answer your question, everywhere and nowhere, answer that. So my dad was a military man.
Okay.
And so we moved around every year when I was a kid. I'd go to one public school, and then we moved to a different part of the country. Always in the U.S. Didn't go outside. But so when I say everywhere and nowhere, I've been all over the states as a child.
So it's not you couldn't say like I grew up in this town. It was all of them.
All of them. So you learn some skill sets.
Okay. So yeah, I know that's a little bit. So you had, you make a whole bunch of new friends and then they're gone.
So the skill set that you learn is you learn how to make and break friends easy.
I don't know. That's kind of a scary skill to have. I don't know if I want that skill.
Well, for example, I have no idea what it's like to live in one town where you grow up with the same people in middle school and high school.
Right.
And then you do. I mean, I have no clue what that is like.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in a big city, so I didn't.
Okay.
So similarly, Seattle.
Oh yeah.
So we did. Yeah, I mean, similarly, like I wouldn't have the same people in high school as I had in middle school and stuff like that. So it would, but it's obviously different. Like you can still have long-term friends because you're not leaving town.
So I actually spent a year in Seattle. One of the I think I must have been 9 when we were in Seattle because there's several military bases up there, and so my dad was there. Yeah.
So do you have a memory of the first time you knew you wanted to do science or astronomy or physics?
Ooh. Yes and no.
Okay. Do you have any memories of?
Okay, so memories. Let's go memories. I think I must have been like in 5th grade. Or 4th grade, whenever you're learning your multiplication tables, and the teacher played this little game, and so she wrote up a number, like 5 numbers across the chalkboard, still chalkboards, and so she would send 5 of us up there, and you had to write as many combinations of multiplications that you could get to, let's say it was 5. So 1 times 5, 5 times 1, as many of those as you could do down.
Okay.
And so somehow I think I got a very easy number. I forget what it was, but I had like, half the chalkboard filled with combinations of multiples of integers that made these. And I go, this is kind of cool. But I didn't really have an inkling I wanted to be a scientist at that point.
You just thought math was fun.
I thought math was fun. It was just easy. It was just flowed. And in high school, I thought physics was stupid. I mean,
really?
Oh yeah, I thought this was the dumbest thing in the world. How in the world am I smashing 2 balls together? How does that mean anything to the world? I mean, I didn't understand it. Plus, I didn't, it was so good. So I didn't decide to get into astronomy until I was well into my late 20s, let's say, early 30s, somewhere in there.
So you were so high school and college. What were you studying then, if not physics, or astronomy? Or?
I would say the honest answer to that question was swimming.
Okay. All right.
I also happened to swim competitively.
Okay.
That was reasonable. And so that's really, but academics was not my thing in sort of the traditional time scale where you go high school to college, right? And so in all that I was swimming, and that was my main focus, I think, in life. And after that went away, a number of years went by. And it was only then, in sort of like my late 20s, I decided, okay, you know what, I'm going to get serious about academia because I was relatively good at it. It flowed. Oh, okay. So then I actually went to UC Santa Barbara to do my undergraduate.
Oh, okay.
And this was in the 80s. In the 80s. And then after that, I had gotten myself into so much debt that I went up and worked in Silicon Valley for a number of years. I was doing power devices, so devices that handle a lot of current and voltage.
So you majored in physics and then applied that to
Silicon Valley. So I got a position doing device simulations. So that was both at the device level, so an actual transistor, how does a transistor work and do.
So you made good money then, probably, right?
I would say I made good money and I spent all that money. I was not a good boy. And it was only after working in Silicon Valley for about 4 or 5 years, this sort of idealistic streak came up, and I decided, you know what, I want to be an astronomer. I'm gonna do some astrophysics. And so,
how do you get into right away? You were gonna say,
and so right at some ripe old age of 32 or something, I said, okay, let's go to grad school.
So how do you? I mean, that's a transition that's tricky. Like after you've already gotten out of it,
been out of it, yeah.
But you just You just studied up.
I didn't even do that. Let's just go.
Okay.
So I applied to like 40 places.
Oh, that was smart though.
Oh yeah, because you never know. And so I got into a few, and I ended up choosing Santa Cruz, and so I went to UC Santa Cruz Lick Observatory for my graduate work, and I was the oldest graduate student coming in.
Okay, well that's okay. But I would say I had a not same thing because I didn't ever go to Silicon Valley, but I had a long break between undergrad and grad school, and I was one of the. I don't know if I was the oldest. I didn't count.
What did you do?
But
I know you're interviewing me, but I'm turning around a little bit.
I did a lot of things. I worked at a pizza place.
Okay.
I was a security guard for a while. I just did a whole bunch of stuff.
So one of the things I did was animal feed delivery. So we would haul up animal feed, and I would take it out to the ranches.
I thought I would hate it, but I actually really enjoyed food service. It was really fun. But anyway, to answer your question, but yeah, but I know, like, for me, it was hard to get back into it, or at least hard to get accepted into a grad school because if you'd taken so much time, nobody knew who you were,
and you weren't on the standard track. Right. So so I ended up going to Santa Cruz. It was great. Okay. And it's been that story ever since.
It was sort of you never had an inkling towards astronomy before that, or you just generally thought of it as...
I didn't have an inkling toward it. I think what maybe spurred me in that direction is actually I went to a dentist office, and they had a National Geographic on the table.
Okay.
And the Geographic was about supernova 1987A.
Oh, okay.
And so in there was Bob Kirshner and Stan Woosley, and they were talking about 87A in National Geographic. And I thought, this is kind of cool. I ought to try and do this.
I love it when a story, I have no idea where it's going. You start with saying, I'm going to a dentist's office, and this is how I decided I wanted to go into it.
This is what I think this is what I want to do.
That's cool.
And so I ended up going to Santa Cruz, where Stan Woosley happened to be, and so I ended up being Stan Woosley's graduate student.
Oh, that's cool. So, okay, now, were your parents in any way influences on how you became to be a scientist, or was it just your own, sort of, you suddenly said, I want to do astro?
No. So, to give away my age a little bit, Sputnik was a thing when I was a kid, and there was a huge influx of money and interest in, we got to pick up what we now call STEM, right? Because we got to compete with Sputnik. And my dad was a military man. And so as a kid, he would spend a lot of time having us do these like electronic projects, and just gave us chemistry sets, and just engaged us while we were doing it. So here's chemistry. What am I going to blow up now? What I mean? but I think he really put the time into making me appreciate what science was or what technology was at the time.
Okay. So it's interesting. It's like.
But that didn't blossom until 30 years later.
Yeah. It's like politically motivated, but it's still very positive, fathering.
Oh, yeah. And just to date myself, I was 10 years old when I watched on a little black and white Neil walking on the moon.
Oh, wow.
And I watched it for a while and said, I got to go play baseball. And so I ran outside into the cul-de-sac, and I looked up at the moon and wow, that's kind of cool.
This is seeing it with my own eyes.
Yeah.
Can't quite make him out on the moon. But.
Okay, now pitch that ball. I'm ready.
That's cool. Okay, well, so then, that answers a bunch of my questions. This is the problem with doing this interview in this way. I have a whole bunch of questions that you've already answered, but it's all right.
That's okay. This far I'll roll.
When you, now here's a different question, which is, when do you feel like you started learning how to be a scientist? Not just, being interested. Well, you can interpret the question any way you want.
Yeah. But. So I think my first, so when I was in high school, I think chemistry was kind of my first science love. And the chemistry teacher could stay after school, and I could do experiments, and so I would make my own aspirin. And if you ask, yes, I took it.
Oh my God! That sounds like a bad idea.
But so chemistry was sort of where in high school. This is kind of fun. I enjoyed going in the lab and just making stuff up and doing that. So I think it's sort of where I got the first taste of, it was unsupervised research, but it was research.
Right. Well, and a lot of your research is, not exactly chemistry, but in that vein.
It's more nuclear now than chemistry, I would say.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, maybe we'll let me ask you these questions before we get into the science.
Sure.
So now that you're an astrophysicist, what are some of the things you like the most about your job?
Ooh. I like the discovery of the unknown. I get a thrill out of finding something, small as it may be, as insignificant as it may be, maybe, but finding out new stuff. I enjoy that search. In fact, it's often more the process of the search than maybe exactly what you find. And oftentimes I don't find exactly what I was looking out to seek, but I found something just as good or better.
Yeah.
So it's the process I think I really enjoy. I really enjoy students. I really enjoy research with graduate students and postdocs and undergrads. So I really enjoy the people aspect of it as well.
Yeah, I love the people aspect too. Cool. Was there anything, this is the potentially editable out question, is there anything you don't like about your job?
Anything I don't like about my job? Yes. At least in the current rendition. So within academia comes with a lot of baggage. Lots of forms, lots of things, and
right.
And I don't necessarily enjoy filling forms or mandatory committee meetings or things of that
That's
form.
True, right?
So,
yeah. And the higher up you get in academia, the more
that comes at you. And that's sort of the weirdest thing is, right, you're hired in for your research because you're a good researcher.
Yeah.
But over time, your plate is so full with all this other stuff.
Right.
You're doing your research vicariously through your students.
Yeah.
But you yourself lose the joy of that, and it's like,
but you don't completely lose it.
You don't completely, but it goes down.
But it's a lot of
it goes down.
Okay, so what would you? I don't know if this is a different question, but I'll say it anyway.
Sure.
What would you say motivates you the most in your professional? You already said this is discovery aspect.
Yeah, just excitement of something new.
All right, we can just move on then.
And the other thing that I really like, you might as well put this way if you want, is sometimes, on occasion, every once in a blue moon, sometimes the things that you find are actually either useful for other people or they're a prediction of something that came through. And then it's like a little validation mark. It's like, yes, all right.
I'm still waiting for a prediction of mine to come true, but the first one I do appreciate when something I do is useful to someone else.
Absolutely.
So then, so I think that most people agree this is a challenging profession, not just because of how hard the math is or how difficult the research is, but how competitive it can sometimes be. So what would you say, what was the most challenging part of getting to where you are currently?
The hardest transition to make is from being a postdoc to being a faculty member, if that's what you want.
Right.
Because it's a game of musical chairs, and there's 100 postdocs, and there's 4 positions, and
right. So when you're applying to faculty jobs, you're competing with some of the smartest people in the world. For this one job.
And time goes on, and the hot fields of the day change, and it's like everybody wants to hire in the particular hot field.
Right.
So just to give you an example, when I was first started, cosmology CMB was all the rage, and everybody had to hire CMBers, cosmology types, and that's not what I do. And then the next big thump that came through is exoplanets, and everybody had to hire an exoplanet person. I don't do exoplanets either. And then gravitational waves happen, and everybody has to hire a gravitational wave person. Right. And so, it was always sort of against the hot topic of the day.
Right.
But perseverance, I think, counts for a lot. I was actually out. I've been out of astronomy twice. And I've come back twice. So, and it was on the last round where I finally got a faculty position at Arizona State University. And just to give you a sense of how long that process was, normally when you're hired in as a faculty member at a university, you start off as an assistant professor, and then after a number of years, you become an associate professor,
right.
and then a number of years later, you become a full professor. So at Arizona State University, when I was finally hired, they just hired me as a full professor.
Oh, well, that's good.
So I skipped the whole
at least got to skip that
associate. not because I didn't pay my dues.
Right, exactly. Okay.
But yeah, that's really the hardest part. Is just the job part, right?
Right. Yeah. You never know if you'll have that job when you're on that track to.
Yeah, and you're always going to have a plan B. So whether it's going into industry or quants, financial quants were big for a while. Now it's all data science.
Right.
You just give yourself options is a good thing.
Right. Right. Okay, so let me actually, now that we've talked about you for a bit personally, but let's actually start talking about your research. So, when you meet a new grad student or a fellow scientist and they ask you what you work on, what do you tell them?
Stars. Broadly defined.
Just stars.
No, I usually go stars, pause. Broadly defined.
Okay.
So anyway, from how they're made to how they live to how they die, and then what happens after they die, the effects of that afterwards. So
everything about stars.
Everything about stars.
Okay.
I love them all.
And so then, so you have, maybe you can give some examples of maybe like things your students are working on or types of...
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So my current two graduate students, one of them, Morgan, and when she works on pulsating stars, so in particular pulsating white dwarfs, and so she is looking for signatures of nuclear reaction rates in there. So in other words, it's sort of an inverse problem, right?
So when we're seeing these pulsing white dwarf stars, and they're and trying to look for signatures of nuclear reactions.
Correct.
So it's trying to see evidence of some
So
particular...
if the reaction, let's just say if the reaction rate was 10 times higher, you would expect, I'm just making this up off the top of my head,
that's fine.
A pulsation rate that was 10 times higher.
Okay.
Or if it was half, it would be half as many.
Trying to relate the pulsations
to something terrestrial, like a nuclear reaction rate.
Correct. Okay. So then, and so this is theory, of course.
Theory and observation. Yes, it's theory on the calculations, but then we try and put it up against actual data on the observations.
Okay, so you do both.
I'm mainly a theorist, but I respect the observations a lot, and the observations are usually the primary drivers of where we'll go.
Right.
Because there's a mystery there. There's something kind of cool.
So you're
there.
not actually under the telescope taking data, but
I would be completely the wrong person for that. Completely the wrong person.
But you'll happily look at somebody's data and use that to...
And try and interpret it and understand it and make it better. I learned really early on that I was not very good with mechanical and things.
Me neither.
Who needs these extra 10 screws?
When we get done with this, we'll see if I actually ended up hitting record on this podcast. So
excellent.
But anyway.
You want to check now?
It looks like it. But anyway. So then,
and so the other student I have, so that's Morgan. And then the other student I have, Ibrahim, he is working on, so stars, most obviously they emit light, that's what we see, but they also emit other things that we don't see. And so they emit things like particles like neutrinos. And surprisingly enough, after 40 or 50 years of stellar evolution, how those neutrinos look across all stars has not yet been done, and so that's what we did most recently.
So in other words, neutrinos are these things. We can talk about neutrinos. What these are the neutrinos are these things that you say that we don't see, that we can't see them with our eyes. They're these particles, these very light particles that barely interact with us.
Right.
And so we can't directly, we have to design very
large instruments to detect them.
Right.
But we have detected them 3 times, neutrinos. So most importantly, we detect them from the sun. And so as we talk here, there's roughly about 1 trillion neutrinos rolling through your body right now. But they don't interact with things, mostly. Except the occasional rare DNA twist, but hey. Then we get it from supernova 1987A. We caught 10 of those neutrinos.
10 individual neutrinos.
10 individual neutrinos out of approximately 10 to the 52 that were emitted.
Okay.
So
it's not...
10 to 52, huge monster number, and all we do is catch 10 of them.
Right.
In part because A, they don't interact much, and B, we just didn't have the detectors up and running.
Right. That's 87.
In 87, it was they were actually looking for. It was a serendipitous discovery. They're actually looking for other things, and they went off.
Okay. That's cool.
Wow. And not only that, it went off at 3 different places in the world, so we knew that it was real. It was not just
coincidence.
Yeah.
Right. So.
And then the other one, neutrinos that we have discovered much more recently, and this is with the ice cube detector down in Antarctica. So it's buried under the ice to help suppress the background, and so they have detected neutrinos from very distant galaxies that blazar.
So those are the 3 examples of things that we've seen neutrinos, that we have so far seen neutrinos from.
Yes.
But all stars emit neutrinos, is that right?
All of them.
Every single one of them. They're all emitting neutrinos all the time.
They're all emitting neutrinos at various levels, yes.
And so this is a calculation of how much different stars emit neutrinos.
Different types of neutrinos, when they emit different neutrinos. And then you can ask yourself, okay, so what if I add up all the energy that comes out in photons from stars, and I take a look at all the neutrino emission that comes out of stars? Which one's greater, and by how much? And so it turns out that 7% of a star's total emission comes out in the form of these neutrinos.
Okay.
Yes, 93% comes out in photons that we see, but amazingly enough, 7% of the total emission comes out of these little tiny subatomic neutral particles.
Cool. Okay, cool. So those are a couple examples. But you do other things with your day.
Sleep, eat, ride my bike, swim.
Well, I meant you do other things professionally during your day.
Yes, I do.
You're also an assistant editor-in-chief?
I am associate editor-in-chief. So I'm basically second in command of the American Astronomical Society journals. And so we publish things like the Astrophysical Journal, the Astronomical Journal, and a number of journals.
And just for context, this is, for example, the only journal I ever publish in, and like a lot of people I know.
Good for you.
Exactly. Good. That helps.
With all due apologies to my British and European colleagues.
But it is one of the big.
It is one of the main. It is one of the main professional journals. Yeah. So I have been doing. So when people submit their articles, like you submit your article to a journal, it doesn't just get immediately published. It goes.
Right. Better not be.
So we send them out for peer review, and so that means that you send it out to someone else who takes a look at the manuscripts and writes up comments, and you send those back to the author, and there's sort of a loop that you go through, improving the paper. That's the whole point of peer review, is to improve the paper as you get through.
Right.
And then when it reaches some point, everybody's happy, you accept the paper for publication.
Right.
And so being a scientific editor is sort of running that peer review process between the authors and the independent reviewers.
Right. And so now you, because I notice, at least when I submit papers to you, you seem to know the paper, read the paper, at least look at it quickly. That means you're reading a ton of papers.
Yes.
Like a lot. Like
Yes.
Because
Yes.
like
I can
every paper.
I can be quantitative about it, but you are right. I do read the papers before. So when, as an editor, so a paper comes in the first thing you should do is at least look at it,
Right.
if not read it in a little bit more detail than that.
Right.
I typically err on that side of reading it a bit
Right.
more, because then you have to choose a referee. Okay, who's going to be the independent reviewer of this article? In order to
Right.
make a reasonable choice on that, you have to have read the paper, so
Right.
you know, okay, who's
Yeah.
playing here? Who's an expert in this field? And so, yeah, I do go through it. I started being a scientific editor about 15 years ago, so I've been doing this for about 15 years. I could tell you why I decided to do this. It's actually a fun story, so let me just tell it. So when I did decide to leave Silicon Valley and do astronomy, and I went to UC Santa Cruz, my very first year there, they had moved the Lick Observatory library into the building where the astronomy was. It was a temporary thing while they were doing some stuff up at the observatory. And so in the first week that I was a first-year grad student, I walked into the library, and it was 20 by 20 or something. I don't know. But I remember walking in there, and they had a complete selection of APJ, MNRAS, ANA, Annual Review, PSAP, and I was thinking, wow, all known astronomy is in this room. Let's get cracking. And so I developed this habit as a graduate student of just voraciously reading the journals. I would just pick up a full volume from 1952, and I would just start going through every article in the journal.
Wow.
Okay, what are they talking about? What are they doing? And time goes on, and as you go on, I found myself, because of all the duties you have to do as a postdoc, and then later, I found myself reading the journals less and less and less, and I really didn't like that. And so in 2009, the opportunity arose to apply for a scientific editor position, and I thought, this would be a great way to get me back into the literature.
Wow.
Forced me to read the literature.
Wow.
You don't have to force me too hard. I will do it. And so that was my original motivation for being a scientific editor. And yes, as a scientific editor, at the end of the day, yes, you are responsible for making a decision on accepting the paper, rejecting the paper, and so on. So it does come with a little
power.
That's not the right word. It does come with responsibility.
Right.
And you have to weld that responsibility carefully.
Yes.
Because people invest many hours in their articles. And so it's a people game. It's a people game, and so you need some people skills. But that was my original motivation, and I still do it. I'm probably I probably handle more papers than just about anybody.
Yeah.
So just to put a number on, just to put a number on it, these days I probably handle on the order of about 500 to 600 new manuscripts per year.
Wow. So that's like 2 a day.
On average.
That's a lot.
It's a lot, but I enjoy it. It's fun.
Yeah.
I enjoy interacting with people. I enjoy helping people improve their manuscripts and get them to the point of acceptance and publication.
Well, it's. I mean, obviously, as you're aware, it's a crucial component of our whole scientific backbone to have this process.
Yes,
So,
and the other thing, of course, is you weed out all the nonsense up front. There is a reason, you are a gatekeeper in that sense, right? So you get a bunch of nonsense coming in. No, we're not even going to peer review that thing. It's so bad.
Right.
So there is a definite component to that.
Right.
But the other thing I would like to mention, as part of my scientific editor stuff, or stuff I do with the journals, is I do run a YouTube channel for the
we might as well
journals.
plug your. Yeah, go ahead.
Plug my AAS YouTube, or the AAS's YouTube channel. Don't say mine. Don't say mine. I'm the principal content creator for the AAS Journals YouTube channel. And actually, it's not even the journals. It's larger than that. It's the entire American Astronomical Society. But I am the primary content creator, and every 4 days we do a new release, and I will take the actual article that somebody published and with the author, and I have the author walk through their article from start to beginning, and they get to explain their article. And it works really well because it's different than a PR piece, right? Because a PR piece, somebody else is writing it.
That's right.
And I'd rather hear from the actual author what their interpretation of their paper is.
I totally agree with that. The press releases of these things are always written they're written by the same people at the newspaper who just want to make it as flashy and exciting as possible.
Right.
And oftentimes will say things
clickbait.
And they'll often say things that are like
ridiculous,
completely wrong, and misquote the authors
out of context.
And part of the whole point of this podcast is to get away from that sort of thing, and also and I appreciate I've watched your YouTube channel. It's really nice to get the author to just explain, because the articles are often very dense, and there's a lot that especially if you're not in the field, there's a lot to digest.
And caveat emptor there, if you happen to go check the channel out as you're listening to this podcast, the intended audience for these is active researchers.
Right.
So you may well hear things that you're not familiar with, but that's okay.
Yes.
It's good to hear how astronomers and astrophysicists talk to each other when we're talking the game.
Yes.
Right? What language do we use? How do we describe things?
That's right.
And even if you don't understand it, it's a learning process. And who knows? It may turn you into being an astronomer. I don't know.
What does your actual day-to-day research looks like? I mean, in other words, like when you say you study stars or you work on this problem, like what does that involve, or what does it involve? Maybe what does it involve for your students? I don't know.
Right. So part of that daily research is thinking about new ideas that maybe somebody hasn't come up with. You have an idea, but then somebody did this in 1970. Okay. Well,
that's the problem with reading every journal article.
Maybe they didn't do such a great job, or maybe we know more now. Maybe we have different data. But trying to find what you're looking for are things, at least what I look for, are things that are different, that are new, or that maybe in some cases could be improved significantly. So some of that is there. Then once you come up with that idea, sometimes you will throw it to your grad students or your postdocs, and who knows, that maybe that turns into their thesis. Other times you're just working it out yourself, seeing if this is going to hold water, and so on.
So what would that, like, I don't know, I mean, I'm sure it sounds, I mean, your research is pretty varied, so a lot of the types of calculations you do are pretty wide-ranging, I guess.
Yes.
So, but
anything from pencil and paper, analytical, to simple 10-line programs to check something out, to other things that are more of in the 100,000-line code business, that you have to run on supercomputers. So, it runs the whole gauntlet, and it really just depends on the problem and where you're at on that.
Okay. All right. Well, let me ask you this question then. Now we're into the science. What do you think is, whatever, broadly defined, what do you think is your most impactful contribution, or what, or interpret that as what work are you most proud of?
Oh, goodness gracious!
And it could be a recent thing or something like that.
Okay. Let's go back to the useful part, because one of the things you like doing is useful to somebody besides me, which I like anyway. But it's always good for other people to do it. So I think probably at this point, my largest contribution to the field that I'm most proud about is probably the MESA instrument papers, the MESA software instrument for computing the structure of stars and the evolution of stars. So
let's talk about that. So the MESA is a code that's open source. Anyone listening to this can download it if they want to.
Pick it up and go. Evolve a star.
Maybe you should explain what it does.
Okay. So what it does, well, first of all, you have to have an idea. Let's just do the sun. Let's just evolve the sun.
Right.
Let's just take a very simple case. We're going to evolve the sun. So you go ahead and you download the code. You go ahead and compile it. You read the docs. You read other material about how to run it. But then you create a file that's going to specify some of the parameters of the star that you want to do. Mm-hmm. For example, what is the mass? Mm-hmm. Is it a mass like the sun? Is it 10 times that? Is it a tenth of that? Mm-hmm. Is it a Jupiter? So you have to pick like the mass, and then you want to specify things, well, like what's it made out of? How much hydrogen does it have? How much helium does it have? Mm-hmm. How much metals does it have? Mm-hmm. And you basically specify some external properties in a file, and then you fire the program up, and it will go ahead and read those specifications, and then it starts its calculation in time, evolving that model forward.
So it tells us what the star will do over the course of its lifetime.
Correct.
Just based on all of those parameters that you give it.
And behind there are some equations that guide that evolution on what should happen.
And so it's obvious to me why this is so impactful, but...
Well, I think, so the reason why I think MESA is, MESA has literally probably thousands of users in the community these days, over time, several thousand anyway, that are using it. It's produced hundreds of PhD theses. It's a very widely used program, and it has helped in the past decade with a renaissance in stellar astrophysics. Right, there was some notion 10, 15 years, stars are a solved problem, right? We don't need to worry about stars. We can move on to other things. Boy, I couldn't be more wrong. And so one of those was just observational drivers, the amount of new data coming out from satellites on stars. And we're also fortuitous in the timing. So the first public version of MESA came out in 2011, which just happened to be when all the stellar stuff was rising, and there was this huge pent-up demand from both theorists and observers to give me a model of this thing. How do I know what's going on? I have observations, but in order to help interpret those observations, I need a model. And so MESA was sort of the right tool at the right time, right place, and it took off. So I'm very proud of that work, mainly because it's done a lot. If you're asking me what work I am most proud of technically, I would say probably it was some work I have done in equations of state, so the thermodynamics of what happens inside stars. That is probably I'm most proud of that technical work, I think.
Yeah, well, my students are benefiting from that as well.
Yes, useful.
It is useful. It's definitely very impactful. So, and it's interesting because these are things that are really tools that are like very basic, not like they're complicated, but they're very foundational. In other words, it's not like you're saying my most impactful work was like doing this specific
star
or something.
Yeah,
it's more all stars,
and it's infrastructure.
Right. It's
infrastructure that will really help drive. Although that wasn't the original intention when I did it, I was just doing. Nobody's done. This is a cool way to do this. And so I can see if I can describe the essence of that in a minute. So usually when people think of interpolation formulas, they think of one point to the next point to the next point, and I'm going to take 3 points, and I want to know what happens somewhere in between, right? And so it's multiple points. You're interpolating across multiple points.
So when you say that, sorry, just to be clear, I'm trying to think of whether my parents know what you mean by interpolate, but
okay, got it. Let me back off and rephrase that. So if I only have, so what does interpolation mean? Let's say I have 3 points. I have 1, 2, and 3.
Right.
Those are my data points. Suppose I want to know what happens at 1.5.
Right.
Or 2.5.
Right.
Okay, well, I have 3 neighboring data points, and so I can use those 3 neighboring data points to tell me something about what's happening at 1.5 or 2.5.
Right.
That process of telling me something about nearby points is called interpolation.
Okay. And so, now, where were you going with that?
You want my most technical, I'm
That's
telling
okay.
you.
That's fine.
So that's interpolation. But that's one way to do interpolation of neighboring points around the area I'm interested in. The other way to do it is to say I have this point, but not only do I know the value at that point, but I know the slope of a quantity through that point. The derivative. So I know both the value and the derivative at that point. Maybe I'll even know the second derivative at that point. And so the idea is to tell you something about neighboring points by using just the function values there and how they change.
Right. Using calculus.
Using calculus. So it was a very different approach when it was done.
Okay.
And the reason why it's nice is because it makes a very direct connection between the thermodynamics and the interpolation method.
Okay, so you actually there's physics in your
There's physics in the interpolation.
code.
It's not just random things.
And so anyway, so
That was
okay. That's fine. But no, I mean, that's interesting. These are the things that I latch onto, too, is like these really cool physicsy things about the useful stuff that you develop that maybe most of the users don't care as much about.
They don't care as much about, but they run it every single day, and they just don't know it because it's part of the infrastructure in the background. Unless you are some thermodynamics aficionado, you're never going to care, you're never going to know.
Right.
But it's in the back end doing its job.
By the way, like I've gone to your website so many times for other things too, like all kinds of things, like you said, equations of state, nuclear reaction networks, and tests of fluid dynamics tests and things like that. So, just like lots of resources that, like, I bet you a lot of people also make those things, but then don't put them up publicly for people to share. And
again, to date myself, I was trying to share infrastructure, software, before there was GitHub, before there was SourceForge, before any of that, and people were telling me I was crazy to be doing open source,
because
giving it away.
You should patent your stuff, and
that I should take it and use it as a competitive advantage for myself.
Oh yeah,
and that was that's what everybody had done, right? Because if you develop something, I can get resources, i.e. money or computer time or whatever it is, because I have a capability no one else has. The only person who can do this is me. And so it's a competitive advantage. Right? But that was not what I wanted. I wanted to help people. I wanted to broadcast it to people. So the whole reason that stuff is on my website and not on one of these other open source repositories is because that's how I started trying to give it away, was just posting it on my website. And I just decided to stick with it.
I know. I have sometimes been given that same advice to not share my code, and usually my attitude is I'll post my code. No one's going to download it.
Yeah, I don't want
but I mean, it's you're doing that's the act of doing science, is you're communicating these things and making it usable by others.
Other than helping people and just building community with. That was always so much more important to me than you. I may be able to get an extra $10 if I keep this quiet. It was no. But it's a philosophy, and I certainly understand the reasons why someone would not want to publicly share it.
Right. So especially given how competitive things are. Right.
Yeah, it's competitive, and when you do release something, there is at least a little bit of responsibility to maintain it, or to help people to use it, and that implies a time requirement.
Yes, right.
Which then implies a monetary requirement. So there is some responsibility that goes along with just throwing it out there, and not everybody wants to do that.
I just
I get it. It's okay.
I just put a scary README on my People don't bug me usually, but
yeah.
but, you know,
I mean, they're all good. They're just different approaches. It's all good. It's all good.
Okay, well, that's great. So let me ask you this now. This is the tough question. All right. In your opinion, why should we care about astrophysics?
Why should we care about astrophysics? We should care about astrophysics because we have always looked up at the stars and wondered what they were and what are we doing here? How do we fit into this? And so and occasionally astronomy will help make something really practical, like CCDs, which you can find in your iPhone and you can go take a picture at. So on occasion, there are technical advances that astronomy helps do. But in general, I think
that's not why we should care about it.
But that's not why you should care about it. The reason you care about it because it gives you an intellectual and emotional satisfaction about how and where you fit into the universe. That's all it is. That's all it is. And you either say yes to that or you say no to that. Most people say yes to that because we've all looked up at the sky as little kids. What the heck is that? And so it's an intellectual satisfaction more than anything else.
All right, I agree with that. All right, so what's next on the horizon for you? What are the next big questions to tackle?
Ooh, hey. Am I giving you away my next research project? Oh, that's another one.
I can't.
They're going to steal my project. I don't care about. I'm usually so far out on the fringe that I don't worry about people scooping me on something. Yeah, because in general, my research has been backbone or infrastructure, or I don't necessarily chase the latest and hottest thing. And I'm not an ambulance chaser, so to speak, and I do respect ambulance chasers.
But so then what? So then what's the next infrastructure that you think would be?
It's a really good question, and I'm looking at that right now. There are a number of things that would be really useful for the community to have. I think some sort of an open source project that deals with, I'm just going to say the word, opacity, to be able to calculate. So opacity is how radiation interacts with matter.
Right.
Okay. And it depends on how energetic that light is, whether it's very energetic or not very energetic at all. It depends on what type of material you're talking about. You're talking about carbon, you're talking about hydrogen, iron, what are you talking about? And as you might imagine, when you consider all of those types of energies of light and all the different types of elements, that gets to be a very complicated problem very quickly.
Right.
And there's only a few groups in the world that can do this.
And just for context, it's very clear that opacity, to me, but maybe not to our listeners, that opacity is like crucial to pretty much everybody doing astrophysics, because the light, from whatever thing you're looking at, the light has to go through some material.
Absolutely.
And that's what makes it look the way it does.
Yes.
And that's how we learn most of what we learn about things, is the material that the light passed through and what it looked and that's how we infer a lot of what we do.
So let's try the interaction between light and matter is what we call opacity.
Okay.
Let's just boil it down.
Yeah.
But it's a very complicated problem, and there's only a few groups in the world that do it really well.
Right.
And they're all closed.
Right. They just have their own codes.
And in some cases, as you might imagine, some of these reside at some of the national labs in the U.S.
Sure.
Opacity is important there.
Reasons we don't have to get into.
For reasons we don't have to get into, but it's important there. But there is not... Let's put it this way. The last major updates to opacities on a global sense was done maybe 25 years ago.
Okay.
Right? And so I think what astronomy really needs is a real good open source toolkit that can calculate opacities for you across a wide range of light energies and for all different types of elements.
That's a really smart idea.
That's what I'm looking at.
It's funny because pretty much everybody else I will ask this question will not give me an answer like that.
Okay. Like I said, I'm so far on the fringe there.
But that's infrastructure. That's like incredible. That's like saying like we don't have roads. You know.
Yeah. We don't. We still have wagon wheels going over dirt trails.
Right. You know, there are some people that have their own roads that we're not allowed to use.
Roads, you're not allowed to go on.
But you know, and so it's up to somebody to make some roads.
Yeah.
And you know, that's not what people want to do. They want to go to the place and do the thing.
And once you put that tool out there, it will have its own momentum, and people will contribute because they want to apply it to their stuff, or they want to make it better in this regard or that regard. But I think that's really a crucial piece of infrastructure to be looking at.
So
that's an infrastructure side. I think on the science side, pulsating white dwarfs still have some fascinating. I still think there's some gold in there to dig out, and so so in general, in my research, you mentioned I do a lot of things. The more derogatory way to say that is I strip mine. So I go into a field, I look around, I find a piece of gold, I find a piece of diamond, or maybe I don't find anything at all, and I move on.
Right.
I haven't taken the approach where I just dominate a particular topic. So when a New York Times person comes in their Rolodex, this person for this topic. I'm not there.
You don't show up.
I don't show up because I tend to. I like the freedom to move around between different topics.
Right.
So.
Okay.
But yeah, I'm fascinated a little bit by still. It's still relatively recent for me. I've only been doing it for about 3 years, and I still think there's a couple more gold nuggets to find there.
So what is it about pulsating white dwarfs that is like, I don't know, that you think is exciting or interesting?
Because they can tell you about things you cannot see. So all we see is the surfaces of stars. Then it gets too optically thick, too much opacity to bring that one back.
So
we can't see into the inside. We can't see inside of the sun. We can't see inside of a white dwarf. But what these pulsating stars do is they basically give you a telescope into the interior of the star. And so I find that just concept fascinating. It's almost like sonar underneath the ocean.
Right, okay, because they're oscillating. It's telling you something about, the waves that are rippling from deep in the interior.
They can only propagate in this way if the star is this way. And so it's telling you about what the conditions are in the interior. What's the temperature? What's it made out of? How it's the density? And so they give us a probe into the inside. And I find that fascinating because we have otherwise very few probes that will tell us about the inside of stars, which is, to me, where the action takes place.
Right. Okay, well that's great. I think it's about it's all the time we have.
Trats, we could talk another hour here.
I gotta go because Abby's giving a talk in 10 minutes. But are you gonna be down there?
Oh, you gotta be down.
All right. All right. Let me do the quick. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I had a lot of fun talking science with you, and I hope you'll join us again sometime.
Awesome. I would really appreciate it, and thank you so much, Paul.
All right. Thank you.
You might notice at the end there I had to cut the interview. If you'll remember, we did this in the middle of a conference, and we had to wrap up because we were about to go see a talk by Dr. Abigail Pullen, who you might remember from episode 1, Small World. In any event, I'd like to thank Frank one more time. I think he has a great perspective and approach to science, and I think he's great at seeing the beauty and complexity in the little things we often overlook. If you want to see more of Frank, you can check out the YouTube series, the AAS Journal Author Series, where he interviews authors of recent journal articles so that they can explain what they did in their paper. Thank you, Dr. Timmies, for the great conversation, and thank you to our listeners. We will see you next time. The Astrophysics Podcast is supported in part by the National Science Foundation under grant number AAG 2206299. All the music on the Astrophysics Podcast was written and recorded by Britton Ashford, and you'll find it on her album Trotter. All songs are used with permission from the artist and producer. Thanks again to Britton for allowing me to use her music. Please look her up if you enjoyed it. This podcast is produced in beautiful Lafayette, Indiana by me, Paul Duffel, professor of physics and astronomy at Purdue University.